with just taking a person and discarding them like they're trash.
No matter what you have to do to get closure and justice, you do it.
And then sometime after that was when they found out that she was killed.
That would be the last time family last seen Marlena.
My mom would keep a knife, kind of close to her.
And I've missed my sister for a long while.
Pining, wherever podcasts are found.
Welcome back to another episode of Pining. We are starting off season 2 here with Jamie Worsley and myself, Brittany Blake, and we want to close out season 1 by talking about some of the updates to the cases that we covered in season 1. So yes. Start by telling us a little bit about the 2 main ones that have updates or have moved forward.
Sure. So season 1 we covered 11 different episodes, and there have been major developments in 2 of those cases in particular. The first is an unfortunate update, and that is in the case of 9-year-old Nigel Brown. He was actually shot and killed while sleeping in his Albany home in what they believe to be a drive-by shooting. The photo of the person you just saw on your screen, Gunardrick Brown, was the only person charged in connection to Nigel's death, but we have since learned that the charges against him have been dropped. So this was a big story that we at WAOB covered when it happened. He was charged initially with a slew of charges, and again, unfortunately, those have been dropped for, quote, strategic legal reasons, according to the district attorney's office. So what the district attorney, Greg Edwards, told us was that while there was sufficient evidence to secure a arrest warrant, there was not sufficient evidence to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt at this point. They did say, however, charges could be brought again in the future were that evidence to emerge. And so that's where we stand right now. Again, the family blindsided, they say, by this announcement and this decision, but ultimately, they do want the case to proceed with the best foot forward as possible, and so they did meet with the district attorney's office about this before, this decision was made. But that is where we stand right now. Pittman, again, was originally arrested 3 years after Nigel Brown's death, and he was granted a $15,000 bond 2 months later. And so that's pretty much where the case is stalling at this point. The district attorney's office says they do have some persons of interest, not suspects, and that they are trying to move forward in the case, but that is where we stand at this moment. And I do know there was some turnover with the investigators with the Albany Police Department that were on this case, according to the DA's office, and so they have been working to get the new investigators briefed on the case, and they say they're going to be working together to try and get some movement on this. But basically, that is where we stand right now. The cases were dropped after Gunardrick Pittman's legal team actually filed a motion to dismiss for lack of prosecution. They say they tried to go to grand jury many times with this, and that they just never could get together on the scheduling. So,
was there a relationship between Pittman and Nigel Brown's family that maybe originally, or was there some type of connection where he was originally arrested?
So when we talked about this case in particular, I don't believe Gunardrick Pittman was known to the family. Okay. I will say, when I was looking through the case files and that motion to dismiss that I was just talking to you about for lack of prosecution, the defense alleges that the only, quote, evidence that the Albany Police Department had in this particular case was a video that Gunardrick Pittman posted to Facebook discussing the death of Nigel Brown, and that there were some mixed interpretations of what he said in that video that kind of prompted them to look at him as a person of interest and then a suspect. But that's what the defense alleges is the only physical evidence in this particular case.
Okay. Well, that's definitely a case we'll continue to be following on as we get more developments. But I know there's another story out of Coffee County, I believe, that was a major break in that case recently.
Right. So speaking of evidence that has emerged after so many years, the case of Sandra Robinson, while we can't say it's been solved because it is still playing out in the court system, there has been an arrest made in that cold case by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. On March 2nd of this year, they arrested Willie James Jr., 58 years old, and charged him with murder, malice murder, aggravated assault in relation to Sandra's death. And they say that this new arrest came after advances in DNA technology. They went back and tested some forensic evidence, and that is how they landed on this particular person. I find it interesting you asked about the connection in the first case between the alleged suspect and the victim, because in this case, they did mention that this person was known to Sandra and was known to frequent the store, the prepaid cell phone store where Sandra was working on the night that she was stabbed to death. And so they did announce that connection, and they did attribute most of the advancements to DNA technology.
And I know in that case as well, we spoke with the family, I believe her son, who had been not living in that area anymore, but was still following, still pushing forward. So just being able to get that justice for the Robinson family, so that they were able to at least get some movement in that case.
Right.
And like you said, Willie James Jr., he was familiar to Miss Robinson.
Yes.
Was there any other leading up to this point that we know of, any other suspects, any other persons of interest that they looked at?
I will say, when I spoke to Trey for the Pining episode that we did on his mother, he did mention that I believe a past boyfriend may have been questioned. And the GBI said that they talked to, they interviewed basically everyone that had any type of connection to Sandra as well, and that until this point, all of them had been cleared. So this is really the first movement we've seen in this case. It was interesting that it came almost just before the anniversary of Sandra's death. You know, they made this arrest on March 2nd, and the anniversary of her death was going to be March 17th.
Wow.
So just a couple weeks later, and again, she was murdered in 2010, so we're talking 16 years for there to be any type of movement and now subsequent arrest in this case.
That is a perfect segue into starting off season 2. So in season 1, we talked about a lot of cases where there were even some breakthroughs,
yes,
where there's still some questions.
Yes.
And in season 2, we're continuing to do that, continuing to talk about cases where we're working to get more information.
Yes.
And even though the podcast is making some transition, I wanted to talk a little bit about how we're doing that transition and what that means for us here on Pining and what they could see in season 2.
Yeah, so Brittany is going to be taking over as the main host of Pining. Of course, I'll still be here as needed as we talk about case episodes, updates, particularly from season 1. Of course, I still want to contribute to those. But then, you know, the mission is the same, covering missing and murdered people in South Georgia whose cases may not have gotten the same level of attention as others because they belong to some subpopulation, right? A rural community.
Right.
They might have struggled with mental illness, a substance abuse disorder. They might be a minority. They might be a woman. All of these things that, you know, contribute to you know, how cases are covered.
Right.
And so those are and how they're investigated. And so we want to continue shining a light on those cases and hopefully see even more cases like these that we've seen with some movement in the court system finally start to play out. So Brittany, I know you kind of wanted to go ahead and introduce our first episode of season 2. I'm passing the baton or the torch to you, so tell us what case we're going to get into today.
So today we're talking about the case of Tareaha Jones. She has been missing for 8 years out of Valdosta, Georgia. She's actually originally from Kentucky. She moved to Georgia basically to get a fresh start, looking to start her life over. She moved with her aunt, Nicole Washington, and in Columbus, transitioned to Valdosta, then transitioned to Tifton, and unfortunately after going back to Valdosta, she just vanished, and her family had no idea where she was. She did have a substance abuse issue, and you know, she dealt with that, but one thing her family was very clear about when speaking to me is that she never just did not speak to anyone.
Just went off the radar and didn't check in, right?
Yeah, so she always would contact them, let them know what was going on. She had 3 children, and her 3 children at the time were already awarded to the state, so they have a foster family, and thankfully they were adopted. So now they are 20, 16, I believe, and 12. And so you know, they've grown a lot since she has been gone, and unfortunately they don't know what happened to their mother. They just never saw her again.
Wow.
Which is so unfortunate. And even for the family, speaking to them, especially their grandmother, Tareaha Jones, just saying that, you know, looking at them, she sees her daughter and she just wished she could give them some type of answer as to what happened to their mother.
So I know you also spoke to her family extensively. How did you kind of go into this particular story? How did you approach it? Because it is sensitive when it comes to things like substance abuse disorder and how these cases are covered and potentially how they're investigated. Were the family open and willing to talk about that? Did they feel it inhibited her investigation any? Tell me about that.
So definitely speaking to her aunt first, Nicole Washington, she was very clear about, hey, I want you to know these are all of the things that we knew of. She offered me all of the information, and one of the biggest things she said is that she felt that her substance abuse had something to do with why her case wasn't investigated properly. One of those reasons is because she went missing in April, and you know, her family made contact with the police department, telling them, you know, hey, this is strange. The police department was already familiar with Miss Jones, so they already were aware of her, where she lived, all of those things, probably related to her substance abuse, and so they didn't really press the issue, so to speak. And the family had to keep going to them. So what they decided was for July 4th weekend that they would cut off her SSI. So her Social Security would no longer be direct deposit, so she would have to go in, present her ID, and basically get her money back started. That was the way that they were going to basically get her to come forward, you know, and say, hey, I'm okay, or I've done whatever. Because according to Nicole Washington, what the detective told her at the time was, oh, she's probably just, you know, out, you know, spending her money, whatever. She's probably just not talking to y'all. And she was like, no, she would never have done that. Like, she would have always checked in, especially now that it's been a month. So 3 months later was when finally investigators were like, oh,
she never came to get her check, so obviously something's amiss.
Wrong. Yeah, something's wrong.
And I'm sure they probably called hospitals, all the local, you know, jails, the places where your mind would go, hoping that anyone might be. And obviously that hope just was squashed with each, no, she's not here, no, she's not here.
Well, the biggest thing was they started getting messages. So her mom told me that one day she was at work and she got a text that said that Tarea's body had been found. And so she, of course, are 500 plus miles away, just kind of panics. So she called her sister, and she's telling her, and then she's like, I got the same message. So they started calling the coroner in Valdosta and in Tifton, where they knew she was. And the coroner in Tifton was the one who told them, like, we don't have anyone that fits that description. I don't think that any of that, like, we haven't heard of anything like that, so you know, you may want to check in and see what's going on. So that's what really increased their level of wanting to get more done and get more movement in her case, because there was people messaging them things like that. There was people who were sending them details about her life that they knew or they matched up, but you know, they were like, well, we know about her tattoos, we know all these things that could identify her. Could you send us pictures? Could we, like, how could we help from where we are? And it was just so many questions. They were left with so many questions rather than answers about what happened to Tareaha.
Sure. And so I think you've kind of already put together a story about her and, you know, kind of profiling her missing persons case. So let's go ahead and take a listen to that right now, just so that we can get a better idea, again, of what you spoke to the family about and how they kind of are still feeling 8 years later.
But Tareaha had this way of saying things. She had this way of saying things. You were like, oh my gosh, that is hilarious. And she would be so serious. She wasn't even trying to be funny. She would be dead serious. And you'd be like, that is so unhinged. Where did that even come from?
She was the type of person that people loved hanging around. She was a fun person to be around. She's like her mom. She don't take no crap. She didn't take crap off of nobody. She get it honestly.
Tareaha Jones was a 34-year-old mother of 3 when she vanished in April 2018. Even though she struggled with addiction, one thing was clear to her family: she would not just up and leave.
That's not what she does. No matter what's going on in Tarea's life, she always makes sure that she's in contact with someone. It doesn't matter who it is, she's in touch with someone first. So for her to just go off the grid is not the norm.
Then social media messages flooded in that made Tarea's aunt Nicole Washington contact Valdosta Police Department. The last place investigators believe Tareaha was is her home on River Lane, where it appeared she left in a hurry.
But it wasn't until July 2018 when investigators grew increasingly suspicious, because the moment they were waiting for Tareaha to walk into this office to collect her check never came.
We've kind of put a pause on stuff, so to speak, so that she would have to go in person to restart finances coming out so that she could use them. Knowing that her only source of income was these certain finances, by doing this, we was hoping that that would just kind of make her, come forward to where we can at least check on her well-being.
Meanwhile, in Kentucky, Tarea's family is still receiving suspicious messages. All credible leads have been cleared by law enforcement.
I invited all those persons who had any kind of information that they could remain anonymous. I just needed to really hear something from the horse's mouth, so to speak, first-hand information rather than hearsay. So nobody to this point has reached out to us at the police department with any credible information that would lead us to finding the whereabouts of Miss Jones.
Now, 8 years later, Tarea's family is forced to celebrate her birthday each year without her, watch her children grow, and keep searching for answers from miles away.
We always hope that she knows that we didn't stop looking for her, that she knows that somebody out there cares.
But we need some closure, Brittany. We really need some closure, because it's hard. It's really hard. It is.
If you have any information that could help locate Tareaha Jones, you are urged to contact Valdosta Police Department at 229-293-3103. Brittany Blake, WAOB, your hometown news source.
So I did have a couple questions after watching and reviewing your piece. The first question I had was, you mentioned in there that police and the family believe that she left her home in a hurry based on, I think you said, evidence.
Yes.
Can you tell me where you kind of got that information from and how you guys kind of reached that same conclusion?
So Valdosta Police Department was actually the one who gave me that direct quote of she left in a hurry. So Sergeant Hines, who I've spoken to a few times in missing persons cases, he told me that when they arrived there, she still had like her TV on, lights on. It was kind of like a up and leaving type of situation. When I spoke to her family, they basically said that, once they heard information about her just leaving, it made sense because her phone was there. So how they would have reached her, they were no longer available or able to reach her by phone or anything. So that was one of the main reasons why they felt it was like a rushed leaving.
And so you told me that she had kind of moved around, but she was settled at this point.
Yes.
At her home. Had she ever left like this before?
According to her family, she had never left like this. Even, with dealing with substance abuse, from going from, being clean to falling back into substance abuse, she would always communicate.
Right.
One of their biggest things was the fact that when she got her check, she would always get minutes on her phone. She would call or she would text.
Gotcha.
Either her mom, her aunt, her sister, her brother. She would tell somebody, hey, I'm okay. This is what's going on, and that's fine. But one of the biggest things that changed was a relationship that she had at the time. That's what her aunt and her mom both communicated to me, that there was a relationship that possibly changed a bit.
Some dynamics might have changed. She might have been in a relationship and then she was out of a relationship. And so that was kind of explaining why she had kind of come from Valdosta, came back to Valdosta type situation.
But within that, she still always communicated with them. And so that's why they were so strong on something had to have happened. For her to just vanish after communicating with us at least monthly to let us know she's okay.
What tipped them off to report her missing?
So her mom said on Mother's Day, she didn't call her.
Okay.
And so she was like, the last time she spoke to her was April 12th. 2018, and she said Mother's Day she didn't get a call at all.
Okay.
And that's when she said something is suspicious. And then on top of that, they're receiving these messages.
Right.
So it's like it's a feed into both. It's like a blending between April and May, when it's like, okay, I didn't get a call on Mother's Day. Now suddenly I'm getting these messages that's saying she's over here or over there or whatever, but I don't know where my child is.
Right.
I don't know where my niece is. So what's going on? And now we need to call law enforcement to ask them to do something. And what Valdosta Police Department did, they did make one post, which was May 8th of 2018. That's the only post that has ever been made.
Wow.
Since then, her aunt has put her in the national registration. So she's done all of the things.
Gotcha.
So that if she is out there, if she is, if somebody comes across her, that they're able to make contact, identify her, those types of things. And her mom actually put her aunt in charge of doing all of this stuff, because she was like, it was so much for her. She needed somebody who would be dedicated to searching for Tareaha. And when I say they have not stopped for the last 8 years, they still have birthday celebrations for her each and every year for her birthday in October. So this family wants closure. They want to know what happened to their loved one.
That's a really good point that you bring up about the database for missing people. Georgia does not require law enforcement to enter individuals into the NamUs status database. And why that's so important is because, as Brittany mentioned, especially with people who have moved from state to state, who maybe live a more transient lifestyle. There's no, and as close as Valdosta is to the Florida line, as close as Columbus is to the Alabama line, you never know where just crossing a couple zip codes, you might just be out of the state of Georgia's jurisdiction as a whole, or even out of especially out of a county's jurisdiction, like the Valdosta Police Department and Lowndes County in general. And so being part of that database is critical in locating missing people, in identifying any potential bodies or people who come to the hospital with no memory.
Right.
All of these things are crucially important. And so, Georgia is, again, one of those states where this is not required, and legislation is in the works by both us and a lobbyist who's kind of advocating on Pining's behalf to have that be a requirement in the state of Georgia.
And that's a perfect point for us to talk about that legislation a little bit more, and how this is going to help, especially because this is a passion project of yours.
Yes.
And I love talking about missing persons cases and diving in with these families, and I always want to know how I can help more beyond just telling a story and getting their loved one's face out there. So tell us a little bit about that legislation.
Yeah, so it's in the very, very early stages. I've been working with Senator Jon Ossoff's office. They've been helping me to kind of locate resources and people at the state level, because obviously he's federal, to see what we could get passed in the state. And we have a couple ideas. One obviously is making the NamUs database a requirement for Georgia law enforcement to use when there is a missing persons case or an unidentified persons case. So that would be step one. Some other things we're looking at, I mentioned working with Jon Ossoff's office, because at the federal level, there is a law that if a federal agency investigates a murder case, that after 3 years, the family is eligible to request a case review. And so we've seen a lot of stories that garner national attention kind of utilize this particular federal law. I believe it was passed under the Biden administration. So like John Benet Ramsey's father is advocating for Colorado, the state, to adopt the same policy as the federal legislation. Right now, Georgia does have what's called the Coleman-Baker Act, which is legislation that was named after 2 girls that were murdered in the state of Georgia. And it allows for cases that were originally investigated by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation to be reviewed through that cold case review board. So we're talking cases like Sandra Robinson's case, for example, where Trey was able to petition the board to reopen and to re-examine his mother's case. Unfortunately, not every case in the state of Georgia is worked by the GBI. And so, the caseload would be astronomical.
Yeah.
And so families whose cases were worked by a smaller agency don't have that same level of recourse. So could we expand the Coleman-Baker Act to give other families some other avenue towards justice? That's what we're working on. The exact language of it is still to be determined, but we do have a lobbyist who is trying to get some support from some Georgia senators and House representatives. And so if you want to help at home, maybe reach out to your local state representative. That's what I've been doing. I feel like I've called and emailed every single one of them, especially those that worked on the Coleman-Baker Act specifically. So call them, tell them that you've listened to Pining, that you want to help with, lobbying support for this legislation. Every single phone call makes a difference.
That's true, because I think about some of the cases we've covered where that would have been so beneficial, for families to be able to have that, to move their case forward, maybe to just get some closure. So I was thinking about one that I did in December, which was the Brandon Helms case, and talking about how that family has been pushing for something to be done, or they've been begging for the GBI to get involved. And I wanted to ask you if you had any case that you thought of that where, the family were asking for certain law enforcement agencies or even for more to be done so that they can get closure.
Absolutely. So obviously for me, this podcast goes back to season 1, episode 1, a case very near and dear to my heart, the Jessica Van Zandt Dietzel case. And so in that case in particular, Jessica touched several counties just before she disappeared. And so because of the multi-jurisdictional nature of her case, of course, the family longs for the GBI to kind of step in because they can get around a lot of that red tape when it comes to something happening in one county, evidence collected in another county, where it's going to be tested, who's going to be interviewed, all of those things. The GBI can kind of cut through a little bit of that because they have jurisdiction in each county. I think anytime you try and do something new, you have to look at what you're already doing well. And so whether that's with Pining, kind of continuing into season 2, or legislation that we have in the state with the Coleman-Baker Act, I don't think people realize how fundamental that legislation has been in creating this cold case review board by the GBI. But can we expand it to make it possible for more families? I think that's the question we need to be asking, and however we get there, whether it's another review board, whether it's an application process, whatever that is, it needs to be accessible to more families, and it needs to be as least bureaucratic as possible. Because when families
to
are
make it simpler,
navigating this, you know how it is. They're the ones that are doing a lot of the investigative work. So do I pause the investigative work I'm doing to try and bring in another agency? They're juggling so much. And so whatever it is, it needs to be standardized, it needs to be simple, and it needs to be accessible to people in Randolph County with a small population, just the way it is in Lowndes County with a larger population. Your zip code shouldn't determine if your case is solved or not.
I absolutely agree with that, and I think that this legislation is perfect in connection with continuing Pining as we continue to talk about these cases that have developed, or like Tareaha's case where we've never talked about it here, getting more accessibility, having more access to this information helps families, but it also helps people prepare in events like this. One of the biggest things that Nicole Washington, Tareaha's aunt, told me is that now that she's dealt with this, she has a missing persons folder that she keeps.
Whoops. She has a missing persons folder that she keeps.
She has a missing persons folder that she keeps just in case, because she's like, when this happened to Tareaha, she realized there were so many things that they didn't know or they didn't have, and so it kind of threw them off. But like you said, so many families, they're the ones who are actively investigating. They're the ones who are making the calls, doing all of the things, because a lot of these agencies, especially the smaller agencies, they're already dealing with a large workload, unfortunately. And so they kind of have to prioritize what's happening right now versus what happened a decade ago. So that's another reason why I think Pining season 2 is going to be so important to continue telling those stories in a different way, not just on TV, but being able to have people follow along, and continue to give updates. And I'm so excited to be working alongside you even more as we continue to tell these stories and unfold throughout this season. So we appreciate you all for joining us once again for episode 1 of season 2 with Brittany Blake and Jamie Worsley.
Let's do it, Brittany.